The Swiss pharmaceutical company is threatening to delay bringing a potentially life-saving drug to the market due to President Joe Biden's federal price controls. CEO of pharmaceutical company Roche, Thomas Scheiniker, told reporters last month, quote, "We have decided that we're not going to do certain clinical trials because it is becoming financially not viable," the Lever writes. Scheiniker also told CNBC, quote, "There's an environment now that's starting to emerge that, certain medicines would not make it."
Roche has brought in as much as $10 million from Donald Trump's 2016 tax cuts, which saw its net income increase by an average of more than 50%. Joining us now to tell us more is writer at The Lever, Matthew Cunningham-Cook. Thanks for joining us, Matthew.
Thanks for having me on, guys. I appreciate it.
So, Matthew, this company...
What's going on here?
Oh, go ahead, Jess.
Yeah, all of these profits that they're raking in, $10 million thanks to the Trump tax cuts. They've seen record profits. They're saying they can't increase prices. So where's all of that money going? Is it going into necessary research and development?
Yeah, it's as much as $10 billion in increases in net income since the Trump tax cuts, and it's as you noted, it's an extraordinary growth in their profits. But their growth in R&D spending has been about half of their growth in profits. So when they say that these very modest price controls in the Inflation Reduction Act that are far more modest than any other industrialized countries, that those are going to negatively impact innovation, that means that they're going to need to pull drugs from market, that is a conscious decision. That's a strike by capital against the Inflation Reduction Act's drug pricing provisions. That's not a natural outgrowth of some type of invisible hand, oh, we have to do this type situation. And it really, I think, underscores, how these large multinational drug companies think that even in their largest market that they can run around like an 800-pound gorilla without any expectation of any consequences whatsoever. And I think that really underscores just how much control, how much influence the large drug companies have over our political process. They're by far the largest advertisers on television. They spend tens of millions of dollars annually lobbying Congress. They're a key driver in the profits of large Wall Street banks. And all of that combined means that this industry is extremely powerful. Even some very modest reforms run up against their profits and their commitment to growth. And that's what we're dealing with here. That we're dealing with an extraordinarily powerful corporation that thinks that it's free from any type of real accountability whatsoever, despite the enormous tax advantages that it's been able to generate for itself through the Trump tax cuts.
Now, Matthew, we know, I'm looking at your article here, that taxpayers already subsidize drug development by paying for federal medical research. But Roche is arguing that they need these dollars to continue further innovation. Do you buy into that? Because there is a bit of a difference from federal medical research and what a private entity is doing.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know exactly which particular drugs they're talking about here. So some of them could have came from NIH research to begin with. We don't know. I mean, certainly many of these drugs originally come from research, either building off of the research that the federal government originally did. But I think the biggest thing is, if there really was this straight line connection between profits and R&D, then their growth in profits would directly match their growth in R&D spending. And what we see is actually their growth in R&D spending is half of their growth in profits. So I think that really underscores just how we can't really take what they're saying particularly seriously.
I think the economics of this is really important. I want to just break down how we got here a little bit with you. I think when pandemic inflation hit, people thought, okay, suddenly everything's more expensive because our dollars are worth less somehow because the pandemic is bad. It's important people know that inflation is a measure of price changes over time. And at the beginning of the pandemic, we had a lot of supply chain breakdowns. Truck drivers couldn't show up to drive the trucks if they were sick. Warehouse workers had to be socially distanced. That decreased output. Various additional input costs for these companies led to them having to increase prices to maintain the same amount of revenue as they would see before and to stay in business. But there were a lot of other companies that weren't experiencing these disruptions, but saw this as a time where people expected price increases, so they could get away with price increases. Our regular measure of CPI, the Consumer Price Index, is just a measure of price changes over time. So we saw Roche and other pharmaceutical giants raise prices during the pandemic, which I think demonstrates that they can afford these price controls pretty clearly. And these are drugs that people literally need to survive. So what do you make of any further legislation to hold these CEOs accountable or establish maybe some kind of permanent control or prevention mechanism for this kind of price gouging? Because it seems pretty clear to me, and I think anyone who relies on these drugs, that this is the economy working in the opposite direction of meeting people's material wants and needs. This is just greedy CEOs using consumers to make a bunch of money.
Yeah, I think that I think the main thing is that the media needs to treat what these CEOs are saying with some scrutiny, and that's what we're doing at the Lever. Is, look, if you guys are actually going to try and say that there's a straight line between profit growth and R&D spending, then you need to actually do it. There can't actually be, you can't just say, oh, the more profits we get, that means, there's going to be a straight line growth in R&D spending, when that's just not true. And the data in the financial reports back that up, that it's not true. So in terms of the idea of expanding the IRA's drug pricing provisions to cover more drugs sooner and with more aggressive negotiation strategies, I personally think that's a great idea. I think that will reduce inflation, and I think that the hysterical response by the drug company CEOs, threatening to deny people cancer medication because of incredibly modest legislation, I think that, that's the response to that should be to go much further. If people are freaking out because of very basic proposals, then, that means they're going to freak out no matter what we do. So we might as well approach this problem with a much broader scope than the Inflation Reduction Act has. I think it's important to kind of also just recognize, though, that it took 2 decades to actually get Medicare to start negotiating drug prices after Congress banned them from doing it two decades ago. And that again just underscores how powerful this industry is. And I think, if you turn on CNN, if you turn on Fox News, you're overwhelmed with pharmaceutical industry advertisements. And that I think underscores just why there's such little media coverage of this issue and such little media scrutiny granted to these CEOs' comments, is because of the enormous amount of money that they're funneling into the media industry.
So people understand that drug prices are going up, but I want to unpack this a bit further here, Matthew. Talk about the specific type of drugs that we're referencing here, and what impact could having access to those drugs make for people who are dealing with various types of illnesses.
Yeah, basically the approval timeline for ovarian cancer is faster than other types of cancers. I'm not exactly sure of the background on that, but that's just the case it is. So Roche's American subsidiary, Genentech, believes that it has a drug that could be useful for both ovarian cancer and prostate cancer timelines. But because the moment that a drug is released, then it takes between 9 and 13 years for it to be subjected to the IRA's drug pricing provisions. Basically, the CEO of Roche's subsidiary, Genentech, said, we might delay this drug, even if it's effective for ovarian cancer, and release it at the same time that it's effective, that it's approved for both ovarian and prostate cancer, to basically ensure that we can get as much revenue from this drug as possible without it being subjected to the IRA's drug pricing provisions. So it's a very crass kind of definition of profit, where even if they find a drug that's effective, they won't release it because of fear of what might happen a decade down the road in terms of being subjected to drug pricing provisions. And that sounds kind of convoluted, and it is. And I think that really just underscores how modest this pricing reform is, and how crazy it is that these CEOs are so apoplectic in response to very, very, very modest reforms.
So it's fair to say delaying these drugs will cost lives, right? Is it fair to say that?
Well, we don't know. I mean, that's speculation, but what's clear is that, if it's effective, if it's approved by the FDA, given the enormous tax advantages, given the massive amounts of subsidies in terms of government research that these companies are given, that it seems incumbent on them to release drugs to market when they are approved, without a broader set of considerations, given the enormous profits that these companies are able to generate for themselves based off of U.S. markets and U.S. buyers. But they're saying they won't do that. And I think that, it's fascinating that this is a Swiss company. I mean, Switzerland has prescription drug pricing regulations. So really, they're just trying to sap the American market for as much money as possible without kind of giving back in any type of way whatsoever.
Yeah, truly a travesty. Matthew Cunningham-Cook, thanks so much for joining us. More Rising after this.